Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Hauntflix Horrors, the place where nightmares come to life. If you love spine-chilling tales that send shivers down your spine, you've come to the right place. Make sure to subscribe and hit the like button for more terrifying stories that will keep you up at night. Are you ready to be scared? Because the darkness is waiting. Let's dive in. I'm a cemetery operations coordinator, or you can just call me a cemetery manager. Part of my job is sitting down with guests and family members of the deceased to set up funerals, facilitate the sales of plots, etc. One day, a 30-something-year-old man named Carlos, a very spiritual person, sat down with me to purchase a plot for his sick father, who was in hospice care. Carlos was a Hispanic man with a thick accent, and I could see in his eyes that he was very caring. He showed me pictures of his father, who also looked like a very sweet man, much too young to be taken away from his family. Unfortunately, his father's time came that same week, and Carlos arranged for his funeral service at the cemetery. It was a very stormy day, which is often thought to be a sign of good luck during a funeral. The funeral procession stopped briefly in front of the main office building. I stepped outside under the front awning and saw Carlos in the car behind the hearse. We waved at each other. Due to the weather, I went back inside until the procession was ready to proceed to the burial site. I got into one of the cemetery's pickup trucks and followed the procession to the final stop, where I stood with my umbrella. Supervising, as part of my job, is to ensure funeral services go smoothly. After the funeral, I did some laps around the cemetery in the truck to survey the area, as I did at least a couple of times a day. I had a lot of paperwork to take care of, and also had to close the cemetery that night. So later, I went back to my desk to finish up. The cemetery closes at 5:30, so as soon as it started to get dark, I drove around one more time to ensure all visitors had left, then drove over to the front gate to shut it. It was a relatively warm, early March day, but due to the storm, it already felt like nighttime. As I was driving back to my office, I thought I saw someone hurriedly walking down one of the lanes of tombstones before turning behind a hedge and disappearing out of sight. I beeped my horn to let them know the cemetery was closed, but I didn't see them again. I grabbed my umbrella and ran out into the rain in that direction. I turned beyond the hedge and looked down a long row of tombstones on one side and hedges on the other. I didn't see anyone. I looked around in the rain for a solid 20 minutes, but eventually had to give up. I drove back to the office and reviewed the CCTV footage. None of it picked up on any unusual movement, though it was harder to see due to the storm and the darkness. I tried to multitask, keeping an eye on the camera while finishing up some paperwork, when I heard the front door to the visitation room slam shut. I sprang up from my chair and yelled, "Hello?" My first thought was that it was the same person I saw earlier, maybe locked in the cemetery and looking for assistance. I stepped into the lobby, but no one was there. I looked around and called out again, "Hello?" Maybe the door slamming shut was them leaving. I started looking out all the windows. When I reached one, I saw someone on the other side looking back at me with a blank expression. I jumped back and screamed, but they didn't flinch. I stepped closer and squinted, realizing I recognized this older Hispanic man. He looked exactly like the pictures of Carlos's father. With my heart in my throat, I ran out the front door and to the side where I had seen the man, but he was gone. He wasn't booking it into the fields or hiding in a bush nearby. He was just gone. I looked around as I stood in the rain getting soaked, then ran back inside, packed up my things, locked up, and got in my car. I opened and closed the gate once more, locking it behind me, and drove home. When my wife asked me why I was so quiet, I just told her it had been a long day at work. To this day, I think I might have been overworking myself, and my mind was playing tricks on me. But it still is genuinely disturbing to think about. My name is Jeremy. This happened in the dead of October, a chilly and windy night. I live in a somewhat big town with very poor and old early 18th century type buildings. A friend and I were bored one night and decided to go mess around at 3 a.m. I know that going out at 3 a.m. in a poor town isn't exactly smart, but we like to have our fun. We got bored of driving around, blasting our music. We're both big metal heads, and at that point, we had our own band. So, we decided it would be interesting and cool to walk around a cemetery in town. Behind the old town square, there's a massive cemetery divided by two sides of a highway, both sides taking up about 20 acres of land. As I said, it's massive. We decided to check out the older part of the cemetery. This part is completely separated from the rest of the newer cemetery with an old iron fence and gate. We started walking around, checking out the cemetery, trying to read the old moss-covered graves, and taking pictures. We were being a little bit disrespectful, I know, but these were graves from at least a century ago, so there was no one living that would be upset by it. And I'm sure the people in the graves didn't mind too much. After about an hour of exploring, we sat down next to a giant pecan tree in the middle of the old cemetery. That's when we heard a little girl laughing, really close to us. At first, I assumed maybe it was a toy left on a child's grave or something like that. I'm not one to scare easily, so I just figured it was motion activated or something. We are not at all easy to scare, so we both sort of laughed, pointing out that it was creepy, and kept talking and enjoying the ambience. Then, as in all stories like this, I got the feeling of something or someone watching me. Once again, I figured I was just letting the whole thing get into my head. Then my friend said he thought he saw someone in the shadows of a small wooded area right next to the cemetery, where we were really close. At this point, we were both a little creeped out and decided to get up and leave. The exact same laughing noise played again, and then we heard leaves crunching under the feet of someone. That's when we booked it. We ran down the hill leading to the old part of the cemetery, down to where my car was parked. I've never run that fast in my life. It sounded like that laughing noise was following us. We both went into full fight or flight mode, going as fast as we could without thinking. The noises behind us stopped as we got to my car. I started the car, put it in drive, and pulled out onto the highway without looking. Luckily, no one hit us. We got down the road to the only gas station open at that time of night to check the back of my car. We had both been discussing how we were scared something had been done to it. We checked around and immediately found the back doors open. I know for a fact neither of us ever opened it. There was no reason for us to open it. I looked in the back seats to make sure nothing was there, then got right back in the car and peeled out. I'm still confused about what happened that night. I'm not sure if we both overreacted or what. All I know is that I still feel that weird sensation that something is behind you whenever I tell this story. My friends and I were very stupid when we were teenagers. I was around 17 or 18 when this happened. It was the month of October, and I wanted to do something scary in the spirit of Halloween. There's a small cemetery about 10 minutes from where I live, and when I was drunk with a couple of friends, I suggested we sneak into it. I'll make up some names for my friends, Ryan and Mike. We were at Ryan's house. He didn't drink, ever. So, when I came up with the idea, he was the one to drive us to the cemetery. Mike and I were really the ones leading this. Ryan was just along for the ride, but then again, he hadn't been drinking. Ryan parked in some parking lot across the street. It was a ghost town because it was past midnight at that point. We made sure no one was around to see us as we hopped the fence into the cemetery. It wasn't exactly pitch black, but it was slightly hard to see more than 10 feet in front of us. So we were all using our iPhone flashlights. There didn't appear to be any night security in the cemetery, so we kind of dispersed from each other. Ryan seemed to be following Mike more closely. I could still see where they were because of their flashlights. I went off a little further on my own and decided I'd start taking a creepy video. So I started recording with the light still on, of course. I recorded a bunch of old headstones and the general eerie vibe of the cemetery at night. I didn't see Mike and Ryan anymore, so I started to look for them, still recording. I looked at my phone screen and froze. There was a woman dressed in a white gown, or dress, I want to say, with long gray-looking hair. She was looking down at the ground. I looked up from my phone screen to look at her in person, but she was gone. I started to back away. I looked back at my phone screen, and there she was again. Only now she was looking into the camera, or rather, looking at me. I looked up from the phone again and could not see her once more. So I looked back down at the screen again, and there I could see her moving closer to me. I started to scream for Mike and Ryan as I sprinted away from that spot. I couldn't see their lights anywhere. They weren't answering my screams. I had a feeling they were going to try to scare me. So I ran back for the fence of the cemetery to hop it and get out. I made it to Ryan's car and texted the two of them, saying they needed to get out of the cemetery now. They met me at the car minutes later. We all sat in the car, and I showed them the video I took. They had the same horrified looks on their faces I did. Now that I was actually watching the whole video, I could see the moment the woman slowly lifted her head from looking at the ground to looking at me. And then she started to move toward me. We could only see her moving for a second or two before I started screaming in the video and running away. But the way she was moving, we could see no leg movement. It almost seemed as though she were floating toward me. I have that video saved on my old iPhone 4S, but the stupid thing won't turn on. It gets stuck at the Apple logo. I don't want to reset that phone until I can get that video off of it somehow. My friends firmly believe the woman in the video was a real living person who also happened to be in the cemetery that night. But me, having been the one to actually find her, and only being able to see her on my phone screen, well, let's just say I was never a believer in the paranormal until that night.